Peaceful cafe, a regular morning until everything changes. So far can someone gotta stand up against injustice? And who will step in when the line is crossed? This is a story you won't forget. Watch till the end and tell us what would you have done. Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more gripping tales. John Cena walked into the small cafe early in the morning. Adjusting his cape and sunglasses to remain as inconspicuous as possible, he had a busy day ahead but wanted to take a moment to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee. The aroma of freshly brewed beans filled the air, and the friendly buzz of conversation among customers made the place feel warm and inviting. As she approached the counter, a cheerful voice greeted him. "Good morning. What can I get for you today?" asked Christina, the cafe's barista. She was a young black woman with a kind smile that seemed to light up the room despite the early hour. Her energy was contagious, and it was clear she loved her job. John smiled back, appreciating her enthusiasm. "I'll take a black coffee, please," he said, sliding a bill across the counter. Christina nodded quickly, preparing his order. As she worked, John took a seat near the window, letting his eyes wander around the cozy interior. The place had a rustic charm with its wooden tables and eclectic artwork on the walls. It was a haven from the bustling world outside. He watched as Christina efficiently managed the customers, her professionalism evident in every movement. The peaceful atmosphere was disrupted when the doors swung open with a loud creak followed by heavy footsteps. Three bikers walked in their presence, instant changing the mood. They were loud, boisterous, and unapologetically brash. The leader, at all man, with a scruffy beard and a leather jacket covered in patches, scanned the room with a smirk before his gaze landed on Christina. "Oh, look who we have here," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "A mascot for this place, or did they hire anyone off the street these days?" His companions laughed, their voices echoing in the cafe. Christina looked up from the coffee machine, her expression remaining calm and composed despite the insult. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked politely, refusing to react to their provocation. "Black coffee," one of them muttered, but the bearded mem and interrupted him. "Now wait, I'm not sure I want anything made by her," has neared, his eyes narrowing. A shed-dressed Christina directly. "You never know what people like her might put in your drink." The other two bikers laughed even louder. One of them, a blonde man with chunky rings on his fingers, adding, "Yeah, do you even know how to do your job? People like you usually don't last long in places like this." Christina's jaw tightened, but she didn't lose her composure. She took a deep breath, her voice as steady as she replied, "If you'd like to place an order, I'll take it. If not, please let other customers enjoy their more." Her calm demeanor only seemed to provoke the bikers further. The bearded man leaned closer to the counter, his smirk turning into a snarl. "Listen, girl," he said, his tone dripping with malice. "People like you need to know their place, and your place it's cleaning up after use and keeping your mouth shut. Got it?" Christina met his gaze without flinching. "I don't want trouble," she said firmly, "but I won't tolerate this behavior." The man's eyes widened slightly at their defiance, then narrowed with anger. He reached out and grabbed a cup of coffee from a nearby table, throwing the steaming liquid. The hot coffee splashed across Christina's uniform, but she didn't move. Her calm, unyielding gaze seemed to unsettle him. "Oh, you think you're tough," he growled, reaching into his pocket. The glint of a knife caught the light as she pulled it out and brandished it toward her. "I'll show you what happens to people who talk back." Before he could take another step, a deep, steady voice cut through the tension that enough the bikers stirred to see. John Cena standing behind them, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the cafe floor. His calm demeanor bellied the strength in his voice which commanded attention and respect. The bearded man sneered, clearly unimpressed. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" hesked, pointing the knife in John's direction. John took a step forward, his gaze locked on the leader. "I'm someone who doesn't tolerate bullies. Put the knife down and leave now." The bikers exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. The blonde man clapped his hands mockingly. "Oh, look, we've got ourselves a hero. What are you going to do, tough guy?" John's expression didn't change here. Remained still, his calm presence only adding to the tension. "You have two choice," he said, his voice is steady. "You can leave now. Oh, Ryo can leave after." Make you." The leader took a step toward John, his knife raised. "Big talk for someone about to get hurt." John didn't move, his voice dropped to a near growl. Methacine hung a precarious balance, the air thick with anticipation. The tension in the cafe grew heavier as the leader of the bikers took another step closer to John Cena. The knife glinting in his hand, the other two bikers stood behind him, watching with smug expressions, as if certain their leader would handle the situation. Christina still standing behind them with a coffee dripping from her uniform, gripped the edge of the counter tightly, her knuckles turning white. She refused to show fear, but her heart raced as she watched the confrontation unfold. The leaders neared, waving the knife slightly. "You must think you're some kind of big shot stepping in like this. Newsflash, boy, you're in our world now. So why don't you sit back down and let us handle things our way?" John remained calm, his eyes locked on the man in front of him. His hands stayed loose at his sides, showing no sign of fear or aggression, but his presence radiated authority. This end sheer John said in a low, steady voice, "Noon needs to get third, walk out the door, and we'll all forget this happened." The blonde biker chuckled from behind the leader's, lapping his hand on the shoulder of the man next to him. "Look at this guy, thinking he's some kind of cope or superhero. Hey buddy, what are you going to do, arrest us with your coffee cup?" The laughter from the two bikers was cut short when JN took a single step forward. His movement wasn't fast, but it was enough to make the leader stiffen. The man tightened his grip on the knife, his confidence faltering. "For justice, kun, you don't scare me," the leader's Pate Yao think. "I'm afraid of some guy in a baseball cap." John's voice remained calm but firm. "I don't care if you're scared or not. What I care about is you putting that knife down before you regret it." The leader's face twisted with anger and he lunged forward, the knife aimed at John in a blur of motion. John sidestepped the attack, his hand shooting out the leader's wrist with a precise twist. The disarmed the man, the knife clattering to the floor. The leader yelped in pain, and before he could react further, John pushed him back, sending him stumbling into one of the cafe stables. The blonde biker cursed loudly, rushing forward to help. His leader, John, moved with practiced ease, blocking the attack and using the man's momentum to flip him over and onto the floor. The third biker hesitated, glancing between his fallen companions and JN, before clenching his fists and charging. John ducked under the wild punch, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back with a swift movement. He pushed the biker forward, forcing him to collide with the counter. The cafe erupted into chaos. Us stomers scrambled to get out of the way, some pulling out their phones, torqued what was happening. Christina stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing to process the sheer precision and power John displayed. It wasn't just brute strength, it was skill, control, and wavering determination to protect her and everyone else in the cafe. The leader groaned, picking himself up off the floor. His face was red with humiliation and rage. "You think you can just walk in here and humiliate us?" Has gnarled. "We're not done with you." Yet John glanced at the man, his expression as calm as of, "You've already lost, don't make it worse for yourself." Ignoring the warning, the leader lunged again, this time aiming to tackle John with a fluid movement. John sidestepped and grabbed the man by his jacket, using his own momentum to slam him onto the floor. The man let out a grunt of pain, his energy seemingly drained. John pinned him with one knee, keeping him down. "Stay down," John said coldly. The other two bikers groaned and stumbled to their feet, but they didn't attack again. One of them glanced toward the door, clearly weighing the option of fleeing. "This guy's crazy," the blonde muttered, clutching his side where he'd landed hard on the floor. The leader tried to struggle against John's hold, but it was now. "Skit off me," he growled. "You're dead, you hear me? You're dead." Jan leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The only thing that's dead is you're gonna now get up, walk out that door, and don't come back." The sound of police sirens cut through the air, growing louder as they approached the case. Someone had called the cops, and it was clear that the bikers were out of time. The leader glared at John, his face twisted with rage, but he said nothing as John finally released him and stepped back. The bikers scrambled toward the door, their confidence shattered. As they left, the leader shot one last look at John. "This isn't over," he muttered before disappearing outside. John straightened his jacket and turned toward Christina, who was still standing behind the counter. Her hands trembled slightly, but her expression was one of quiet strength. "Are you okay?" John asked, his voice off her now. Christina nodded slowly. "It thinks a thank you for stepping in," John offered a small smile. "Noon should have to deal with people like that. You handled yourself well." The sound of the sirens grew louder, signaling that the police were about to arrive. John glanced toward the door, then back at Christina. "You'll be okay from here?" Christina nodded again. "Yeah, I'll be okay," gave her a reassuring pat on the counter before stepping back. As the police cars pulled up outside, Heakley slipped out the side door, disappearing into the morning sunlight. The cafe was left buzzing with murmurs from the customers, many of whom were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. But one thing was clear. JHO CENA had left an unforgettable mark on everyone in the room. The air in the cafe felt thick with tension as the police arrived. Their presences signaling a temporary return to order. The bikers, now subdued and humiliated, were being questioned outside, while Christina tried to steady her breathing behind the counter. Her hands still shook slightly as she wiped at the coffee stains on her uniform, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through her veins. Customers whispered amongst themselves, recounting the dramatic event, their voices stinged with a wan disbelief. JHO CENA stood near the exit, his posture relaxed but his expression watchful as she observed the scene. Alha had managed to subdue the bikers and protect Christina. He knew this was only part of the battle. There was always the risk that men like them would return, emboldened by the sting of humiliation. His eyes flicked to Christina, who glanced up, and gratitude was evident, but so was the weariness that came from enduring years of such treatment. One of the officers A stern-looking man with a neatly trimmed mustache approached. "John, sir, I've got a few questions for you," he said, his tone polite but firm. John nodded, stepping forward as the officer gestured for him. Outside, the cool morning air greeted the mass. They exited the cafe where the bikers were, now being led toward police cruisers in handcuffs. The leader glared at John, past his face flushed with anger and shame. "This isn't over, Cena." The man has set his voice low but venomous. John didn't respond, his calm demeanor only further aggravating the biker, who was shoved into the back of the car by an officer. The officer standing with John pulled out a small notepad and pen. "All right, Mrs. Cena, can you tell me what happened here?" John recounted the events succinctly, leaving out no detail about the biker's behavior or the threats made toward Christina. His voice was even, and his recounting painted a clear picture of the hostility and danger they had posed. The officer nodded as she scribbled notes, occasionally glancing up at John with a hint of recognition in his eyes. "Well, I'd say you did the right thing stepping in," the officer finally said, closing his notebook. "These guys have been causing trouble around town for weeks now. Glad someone put them in their place." John shrugged his stone, modest. "I just did what anyone should have done, Christy." Nawash handling herself just fine until they crossed the line. The officer raised an eyebrow. Everyone would have had the guts to stand up to them like that, let alone take them down the way you did. You've got some serious skills." John gave a small smile but didn't elaborate. Instead, he glanced back toward the cafe where Christina was now speaking with another officer. Her posture was more relaxed, and the faintest hint of a smile tugged at their lips as the officer commended her for keeping her composure inside the cafe. The atmosphere was beginning to return to normal. Some customers had left, unable to shake the tension from the confrontation. While others stayed eager to show support for Christina, a few approached her offering words of encouragement and solidarity. One older woman reached across the counter to pat Christina's hand, her voice warm as she said, "You're stronger than they'll ever be. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Christina nodded, her eyes glistening slightly as she thanked the woman. She had always prided herself on being able to handle difficult customers, but a day had been unlike anything she'd faced. Before Yatasha looked around at the faces of those who supported her, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wouldn't let this incident define her or undermine her strength. John re-entered the cafe after finishing his conversation with the officer. The room quieted slightly as she approached the counter. His imposing presence is still fresh in everyone's minds. Christina straightened, meeting his gaze with a newfound confidence. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice is steady now, "for everything." John nodded. "You held your ground. That's not easy, especially against P. Oplelik them. I'm just tired of it," Christina admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "Tired of people thinking they can't treat me or anyone like that." John's expressions, "Often the world's full of people like them, but it's also full of people like you, strong, resilient, unwilling to back down. Don't let them take that from you." Christina's mild, genuine warmth spreading across her face. For the first time that morning, she felt truly at ease. "I won't," she said firmly. John glanced at his watch, realizing he needed to get going. He placed a generous tip into the jar on the counter before stepping back. "Take care of yourself, Christina, and if you ever need help, don't be afraid to ask." She nodded, watching as she turned and made his way to the door. The morning sunlight cast a golden glow over the cafe as she stepped outside, his figure momentarily silhouetted against the brightness. Customers murmured their goodbye, some even clapping lightly as a show of appreciation for what he hadn't. As John walked down the street, he allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't planned to be a hero that morning, but sometimes the right moment found you, and for Christine and everyone in that cafe, his presence had made all the difference. The cafe had finally settled into a quiet calm after the chaotic eve. Ends off the morning, Christina continued working behind the counter, her movements steady and precise as she served the remaining customers. Her uniform was still stained from the coffee that had been thrown at her, but she wore it like a badge of resilience. Every sufin she glanced toward the door, half expecting the biker store turn, though deep down she knew they wouldn't dare after what had happened outside. The police cars were gone, and the street resumed its usual rhythm. The bikers had been taken away, and thought their leader had threatened John Cena. Kristen felt a sense of security knowing that justice had been served, at least for now. The customers who stayed continued to too for her words of encouragement, their voices full of admiration for how she had handled the situation. John Cena, having stepped away briefly, returned to the cafe. This time, he was without his cape and sunglasses, his identity now fully visible. The customers who recognized him reacted with quiet amazement, thought they respected his apparent wish for minimal attention. Christina noticed him, immediately, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Back Sassoon sheathed with a soft smile as she approached the counter. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." John replied, his tone kind but serious. "How are you holding up?" Christina hesitated, glancing down at her hands before meeting his gaze. I'm better, it's been a day, but I'll be thanks to you. You were holding your own before. He stepped in Jay and said, leaning slightly on the counter, it takes a lot of strength to stand up to people like that. Not everyone can do it. Christina shrugged lightly, though. Her expression betrayed a flicker of pride. I've had deal with people like them my whole life. You get used to it, but it still hurts, John. Nodded, understanding the weight of her words. You shouldn't have to get used to it. Nobody should. That's why it's important to stand up to them, to show them they can't get away with it. And you did that. Christina smiled again, a more confident smile this time. I guess I did. None of the remaining customers, an older man who had watched the entire confrontation earlier, approached them. Excuse me, Zir, he said to John, his voice filled with admiration. I just wanted to thank you. What you did today, it meant a lot to all of us. John nodded graciously. I appreciate that, but it wasn't just. Mesha stood her ground first, the said, motioning to Christina. The man smiled warmly at her, tipping his hat before returning to his seat. Christina felt a surge of pride. She had expected for so long. She had endured such moments, insolence, believing that speaking up would only make things worse. But a day had proven that standing up for herself wasn't just about her. It was about setting an example, about refusing to let theirs dictate her worth. As the morning continued, Christina noticed more and more customers returning to the cafe. Some of them were regulars who had heard about the incident and wanted to show their support. Others were strangers who had seen the video footage of John's intervention that was already circulating online. The cafe buzzed with a sense of unity and purpose, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the air just hours earlier toward the end of the shift. Christina took a moment to step outside for fresh air. She leaned against the wall of the cafe, closing her eyes and letting the sun warm her face. The events of the day played over in her mind. But instead of fear or anger, she felt a sense of resolve. She wouldn't let this moment define her as a victim. Instead, she would use it as a turning point, a reminder of her strength and the importance of standing up for what was right. John stepped outside shortly after, towering figure, unmistakable even in the bustling street. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, but clearly there to check on her once more. You looked like you needed a break, he said, his voice gentle. I did, Christina admitted, opening her eyes to look at him, but I'm okay. Now they stood in companionable silence for a moment, the noise of the city around them ding into the background. Finally, Christina spoke. Thank you, John, not just for what you did in the but for believing in me. It means more than you know. John gave her a small, sincere smile. You don't need me to believe in you, Christina. You've already proven you can handle yourself, but I'll always back someone who stands up for what's right. She nodded, taking his words to heart. Well, if you ever need coffee, you know where to find me. John chuckled softly. I'll keep that in mind. As she turned to leave, Christina watched him go, feeling a renewed sense of hope and determination. The day had been far from ordinary, but it had reminded her that even in the face of adversity, there were people willing to stand together against injustice. And for that she was deeply grateful. Inside the cafe, the chatter of customers continued, the hum of conversation estimate to the impact of what had transpired. Christina stepped back inside, ready to finish her shift with her head held high, knowing that today she had won more than just a battle. She had reclaimed her voice. What happens when a quiet morning at a cafe turns into a tense standoff? Watch as courage is tested and justice takes an unexpected turn in this gripping story. One act of bravery changes everything. Stay until the end to share your thoughts. What would you have done in this